spent weeks or maybe even months making your beautiful quilt top. So before you hand it off to someone to quilt, make sure that you've done a few simple things that can really help your quilt turn out to be its very best, something you'll be extra proud of. Hi, I'm Laurel from Under My Needle Studio, and I'm here today to show you some steps that I encourage all of the people who bring me their quilts to do before they bring the quilt in for quilting. None of this is difficult. It just ensures that quilts will be done properly and that everything will go smoothly in this process. So let's get started right now. Before you send your quilt off to a Longarm Quilter, make sure that you have inspected it and looked it over for certain things. Make sure that it's free of dust and lint. Make sure that all of the threads have been cut. Make sure that there are no pet furs, and look it over to make sure that there aren't any stains that need to be taken care of before it leaves you. These will just ensure that your Longarm Quilter will be able to get right to your project and get You need to trim all of the loose threads on your quilt before it goes to the quilter. And that means trimming loose threads on the back and trimming loose threads on the front. Those both can cause problems in the finished product. If there's a dark thread on light fabric, it can show through. So you need to clip that and make sure that that isn't something that will be in your finished product and be a problem. This doesn't take long and it's not hard, but it is something that you need to take care of and make sure that you've done a thorough job of getting all those loose threads gone before you start. If you've selected to make a quilt or a project that has buttons, beads, sequins, or other embellishments, you should make sure to leave those off before you take your project to your quilter. These can cause lots of problems with Longarm machines and with your finished product. So the rule of thumb is leave all embellishments off until after the quilting has been completed. Here's a project where I did that correctly. It was quilted and then I added all of the beads to that project. And here's a project that will have to be done by hand because I sewed on all of the buttons prior to quilting. So now I get to quilt it by hand so that I don't ruin a machine or the project. This is one of the most important steps that you will take in doing your quilt, and it's to square your quilt up. You need to trim the edges and make sure that your quilt is nice and square, and that means that it's even in spacing and in measurements all the way around. If your quilt isn't square before you quilt it, then that process is not going to make it magical and make it square. So take measurements, be accurate with your measurements, and take them in several places to make sure that everything is even. Measure 3 places around the width and 3 places around the length and see if everything comes out even. This will ensure that your quilt is square and ready for quilting. If you have a pieced quilt and that there's a lot of sewing that comes to the edge of your quilt, it's a good idea for you to stay stitch the quilt using a straight stitch 1/8 of an inch from the entire outside edge. This simple line of stitching just keeps those seams from coming apart when your quilt is being loaded onto the machine and when it's being quilted. It really protects all of your hard work that you've already done and make sure that those seams stay secure. It's important that you press your quilt before you send it off to the quilter. Use a dry iron and make sure that you press the quilt top face up so that everything is very clean and smooth. This is a chance for you also to spot any open seams that are still working their way out, and to make sure that all the wrinkles are out of your product so that the quilting will not contain wrinkles and bad places. Label your quilt with a small piece of paper that says top so that your quilter will know where this goes on the Longarm Quilter. We're doing this for two reasons. Number one, it makes it easier for the quilter to determine exactly how this should be put on the machine. But sometimes you'll have directional fabric like these triangles that you'll want them all headed in the same direction. You don't want them in the wrong direction. So do this with both your front and your backing by labeling it just with a small piece of paper that you pin to the top edge of your quilt, saying top. In preparing your quilt backing, you should make sure that both of your side edges and your top and bottom edge are 4 inches bigger. In other words, on the top of your quilt and the bottom of your quilt, you're going to have 8 inches larger than the quilt, and down the sides you're going to have 8 inches larger. And as a demonstration, I have this quilt backing that's ready. I've cut off all of the selvages. Now I'm going to add that extra 8 inches by seaming this so that it is ready and exact size needed to make sure that the quilt backing is larger than the quilt top. When I receive a quilt, I'm usually receiving one that is without the batting. I supply the batting for the people, so they don't need to worry about the measurements on that. However, if you are providing batting to your Longarm Quilter when you send it in, you should have an extra 3 inches on every side, or 6 inches all the way around, so that the quilter is able to make sure everything is even and enough is provided to have your quilt turn out perfectly. Keep the pieces of your quilt sandwich separate from each other. Then what I like to do is I like to put everything onto a hanger separately so that they're ready for quilting by the quilting person. I have also identified myself, my contact information, and everything that I need that quilter to know before it goes off to the quilter. Then I put it into a box or into some kind of container, and it's ready to go to my quilt person. Before you hand your quilt over finally to your Longarm Quilter, just go back through that checklist one more time and make sure that everything is done and that you feel good about it. Just taking those extra few minutes at the end can make all the difference in the world in that quilting process, and it makes it go smoother for your Longarm Quilter. This will ensure that your finished quilt looks exactly the way that you imagined it and dreamed of. If you have found this video helpful, please like, subscribe, and leave comments for me that will help me in planning future videos. I'd like to hear what you found most helpful, and I'd also like to know things that maybe interest you for future videos. Surely do appreciate your time.